Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about Wes Miller's film, Hell on the Border. I like the concept of this film. The execution's not fantastic. There's good elements to it, but there's also elements that really just don't work well cinematically. So this is not the story of, but it purports to be inspired by the experience of Bass Reeves, who's a really, really interesting figure in American Western history. Bass Reeves was the first African-American deputy marshal to serve west of the Mississippi River. He was incredibly successful as a law officer. He had, over the course of his career, and it was a fairly long career, he had over 3,000 arrests. Only killed 14 people, which, I mean, not ideal, but this was the Wild West. And this was like legit the Wild West because for much of his tenure, at least, Reeves served in what was called the Indian Territories, which is mostly in what's now Oklahoma. And the Indian Territories was theoretically a sort of independent area, not directly under U.S. control. Theoretically, independent regions controlled by particular indigenous groups. That being said, the reality was often that U.S. law, U.S. military, American settlers felt completely free to impose their own will, their own authority on people, land, even the governments of the Indian Territories. So, not ideal from the perspective of respecting indigenous rights. So, but this was an extremely lawless area because it was not officially part of the U.S., oftentimes outlaws, people who were wanted, whatever it was, would flee to the Indian Territories in an attempt to get beyond the jurisdiction of U.S. law. Bass Reeves was a very, very good law officer. So there's that out of the way. That's the sort of historical background. In terms of this movie, it's not a very accurate depiction of Reeves's ascendancy to deputy U.S. Marshal. He was, in fact, appointed by Judge Isaac Parker, so that's true. But the basic premise of this movie is Judge Isaac Parker wants to appoint Bass Reeves as a deputy U.S. Marshal because Reeves has impressed him with his integrity and his ability with a gun. White people all around are kind of like, hey man, no, because as progressive as we are, a line that shows up twice, oddly enough, as progressive as we are, we do not, under any circumstances, want an African-American appointed as a deputy U.S. Marshal. Senator Smith, who sort of just shows up a couple of times to basically be like, hey, Judge Parker, don't appoint that guy. And even like complains to President Grant about it, and Grant apparently is like, yeah, that seems like a bad idea, I guess. So when Parker finds out that Reeves can't read, he has to cancel the appointment. Parker even goes as far as like pinning the star on him, and then is like, "Oh, I didn't know you couldn't read, so turns out can't do that." But there's this really badass outlaw named Bob Dozier out in the Indian Territories. Bob Dozier, individually, it seems, kills 6 men, or 5 men, under a different U.S. Marshal, U.S. Marshal Jim Bruce, cuts off Bruce's head, sticks the Marshal's badge in the eye, and then sends the head back to Judge Parker, basically saying, "Hey man, leave me alone." Judge Parker, rather than leaving him alone, is like, "Who will go out and get Bob Dozier?" Bass Reeves volunteers. He is joined by Charlie Storm, a convicted criminal of various kinds, who's also getting on in years and is an alcoholic. Storm agrees to go on this very dangerous mission if his crimes will be pardoned for doing so. Reeves agrees to go on the premise that if he is successful, he will be appointed a deputy U.S. Marshal. Parker agrees to both of their conditions, and they set out. They hunt Dozier for a while, encountering some random people, doing some random stuff, much of which doesn't seem to forward the plot too much. What it does sort of establish is, because they meet up with a group of African Americans who have been bringing African Americans out of the South, out of sharecropping, basically, and moving them toward either the North or the Indian Territories where there's land available. And so they do, through their sort of interactions, they do establish the tenuous nature of land ownership in the South for African Americans, particularly sharecroppers. So there's a sort of ideological element to it, but it doesn't necessarily move the plot forward. So you've got a whole center section that kind of drags. There's a bit where Bob Dozier sort of ambushes Reeves, Storm, and their friends, kills one of Reeves's old friends, Sam Six Killer, and so now Reeves has a personal motive to go after him. Reeves, Storm, and this guy named Tom Pinkerton, a Scotsman who had been part of Jim Bruce's original posse, but then was like, "Nah, son, this is too dangerous." They decide they're going to go after Dozier. They come up with a plan to basically wait till nightfall when all the outlaws are drunk, quietly kill the sentries, sneak in, and Reeves is going to capture Dozier while he's asleep. Things are going swimmingly until a shot is fired and Dozier manages to escape from literally, like, Reeves is sitting on his bed, gun to Dozier's head, and Dozier still manages to get up, fire a shot that hits Reeves in the side, and then flee, riding off into the night, despite the fact that all Reeves had to do at that moment was boom, and then the whole thing would be over. But that would not be exciting enough. So, Storm and Pinkerton managed to kill all of the rest of Dozier's gang, which seems to just be a bunch of random, pointless dudes. Reeves kills, actually, over the course of this movie, Reeves kills more people than he killed in his entire career. He only killed about 14 people in his entire career. He kills well more than that in this film alone. But then Reeves is going to chase Dozier down after shooting a bunch of his minions. This is the slowest, least exciting chase scene I've ever seen. Ever. In any movie. Dozier has so much time to actually escape. Like, Reeves has to kill half a dozen people just to get out of the cabin that Dozier has already gotten out of and gotten on his horse and is out of here before Reeves even starts taking on these 6 guys in this cabin. And before he can actually take them on, he has to wait for them to fire all of their ammunition so that he can then kill them more or less individually. While that is happening, Dozier is on his horse, riding away, but apparently covering virtually no ground, because after doing all of this and killing a couple more guys outside, Reeves just trots after him, not even sprints. Reeves is just sort of going along. He does get on his horse, but he's not moving particularly quickly. And then at some point he's like, hey, horse, I'm going to leave you here. If I get killed, take care of my wife and kids. Fucking what's the horse supposed to do? Anyway, so Reeves is just sort of slowly walking through the woods, looking for Dozier. It's night. Dozier is riding off on his horse. Apparently the horse was shot at some point or something, because Dozier then sort of gets off the horse lays down. There's a weird parallel scene where Dozier is like, I should shoot this horse in the head to put it out of its suffering. But then he's like, if I do that, I assume this is the thought process, if I do that, then Reeves will know where I am, so I can't do that. So he goes off, and then Reeves shows up, finds this horse like 3 seconds later, and he's like, I should shoot this horse in the head to put it out of its suffering. But if I do that, Dozier will know where I am, so I can't do that. Neither of them apparently think that you could end that animal's suffering by cutting its throat rather than just letting it slowly die. So Dozier goes off, he starts walking away, and Reeves immediately catches up with him. This whole sequence is so long and so boring and so poorly done. There's virtually no tension here. It does not feel like a chase at all. And so much time. I actually don't even know how much time is devoted to it within the overall runtime of the movie. But it feels so dragged out. And it's such a boring chase scene. I'm sorry. Like, it really does not work. There is no tension here. So, that's happening. Finally, they get to the actual gunfight. Dozier, out of his 6-shooter, fires about nine shots without reloading. So, very classic Western trope there. It seems that he hits Reeves again. We're not 100% sure on that, but Reeves goes down. And then Dozier is like, ha ha ha, I win. I'm going to walk over to you. So he walks over to where Reeves is laying on the ground, at which point Reeves is like, bang, bang, I've shot you. Ha ha, you thought I was dead, but you were wrong. So Reeves ends up shooting him like 4 times before Dozier finally dies. Yeah, and that's the upshot of it. I like the idea of the movie. The plot makes sense. It's not historically accurate to Bass Reeves' actual life or the people around him, but it's an interesting idea for a movie. The execution is bad. Part of it is so much of the stuff that happens in the middle does not really seem purposeful given the actual central plot of the movie. Part of it is the chase scene at the end between Reeves and Dozier is so bad. It's so lacking in any sort of tension or concern about what's going to happen. It feels like they're just stumbling around the woods pointlessly. But the other thing is, and I mean, the film's, I don't know what the film's budget was. It's not listed here on the Wikipedia article I'm looking at on the other side of my screen. I don't imagine it was a massive budget, but the costuming is often not great here. Like, very often the hats that people are wearing appear to be just brand new generic cowboy hats rather than like, yes, I'm a person who's been living on the frontier for a while and my hat has gotten dirty and battered and the shape is not pristine anymore. They look like they've just come off a factory line manufacturing hats. So that's not ideal. There's one scene in which Reeves and Reeves Storm and these African Americans that they've sort of rescued from these random robbers are sitting around a campfire, and the boots that the one guy's wearing that just they are center screen. They are clearly modern cowboy style boots, but like they have a thick white rubber sole without a heel, just flat heel, just thick white rubber. That is not what people were wearing in the 1870s. And a lot of this you can overlook. I mean, these are details that bothered me personally. If you're big into Westerns and you really appreciate that attention to detail, again, I think this is probably not a high budget movie, and so they were probably making do with what they had, and I can't entirely fault them for that. And the thing is, if the quality of the storytelling were better, the acting is pretty good. The acting is generally good. I don't have a huge problem with the dialogue. Some of the dialogue is actually really, really interesting because people speak in these sort of odd, idiosyncratic ways often. But the pacing is not good. And so if this were a movie that worked overall, that was strong overall, I would say, yeah, that's fine. Low budget props, low budget costuming, okay. I accept that. That's a reality of independent cinema. When there's so many other problems like this, it's just one more thing that I have an issue with. I really like the idea of the movie. I want it to be better. Sorry.